Like what we're doing here at Cube for Two? Click the like and subscribe button to let us know. Also, Cube for Two is now a Tcgplayer affiliate. Click the link in the show notes for all your shopping needs to help support the channel. Alright guys, let's get started.
What's good, Cubers? It's your boy Matt.
And your lady Lori.
And welcome to Cube for Two and You, where we discuss all aspects of Magic and cardboard and how they relate to Cube.
That's right. We enjoy cubing so much, we just had to share it with you.
So what are we talking about today?
Well, today we are going to be discussing how to playtest cards in your cube.
That's super exciting. Are you ready to start?
Sure, let's get started. We would just like to remind you that if you enjoy this podcast, to leave us a little rating and let us know.
Yeah, it's the best way to help other people find us is to have a little rating, a little review. iTunes will bump us up a little further in the search results and help other people find our Cube content. But enough with the self-plugs. On with the show.
That's right. So today we're talking about how to playtest cards in Cube, but I first want to clarify for our viewers that we are constantly tinkering with the Cube and not always just playtesting. So when we say playtesting versus tinkering, how would you explain that?
Well, a lot of times when I'm tinkering, I'm really just trying to tweak one card inside of maybe one deck. Maybe there's a white 2-drop I'm not happy with, or someone says, hey, this Mistral Charger, you should try Mistral Charger. Evasion's really sweet. And so, I sub it in. But when I think of playtesting, I think of, a set has come out, and I'm about to drop in, anywhere from 5 to 15 to, in Eldraine's case, like 20 cards. What am I going to cut? What am I going to add? And how does this change the decks inside our cube?
Right. I noticed that frequently you will add a card when you're trying to add to an archetype or a special deck within the cube. But we enjoy actually doing the playtest. And every time one of the new sets comes out, we think of what cards we're going to add to our cube. That is a fun thing for us.
Oh, absolutely. We'll even playtest bad cards just to have some new cards to look at.
Yes. Yes, we do. So when you're thinking about what cards you want to include, how do you actually evaluate the cards?
Okay, so for me, and I'm speaking for me, there are two methods of evaluations that you can use. And the first method is the floor-ceiling method.
Floor-ceiling. Those two words mean nothing to me. What do you mean floor-ceiling?
Okay, so you picture the card being played in its worst circumstance and then the card being played in its best circumstance. Okay. What's the floor of the card? What's the ceiling of the card? And ideally for Cube, particularly a Cube that is as strong as ours, the floor has to be pretty high. We don't want cards that are duds. It's more about a high floor for us than it is about a low or about a high ceiling.
So typically if a card doesn't pass the Vindicate test, it does not have a reasonably good floor.
Yeah, especially 4 mana and up for me. If you're not passing the Vindicate test at 4 mana or up, the floor is really low.
So let's take a look at these Eldraine cards, because a lot of them had the adventure aspect.
Yeah, for sure.
And one of them was Order of Midnight for 1 black and 1 colorless. You get this creature with an adventure on it for Alter Fate for 1 black and 1 colorless. If you cast him as a creature, you're getting a 2/2 flyer that can't block.
Yeah.
But if you cast him as a sorcery and put him on at the adventure, you get to return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Can you kind of explain what the floor would be with that card?
Yeah, sure. So like the floor of Order of Midnight is you don't get to cast the adventure, right? You don't get maximum value. Instead, you just play a 2/2 flyer for 2 mana, which is fine, actually. Evasion is really good. 2 mana is great for the aggro deck. It's a solid price to pay. You can just play them on curve, right? Turn 1, play a Gravecrawler, and then turn 2, you play the Order of Midnight. You've got a 2/2 flyer, and the aggro deck is still trucking.
Right. So even if all you're getting out of this card is a 2/2 flyer, it's okay.
Yeah, it's fine, right? The floor is fine. It's perfectly reasonable. And the ceiling is that you pay 2 mana, you get a creature that you really like back to your hand, and then you cast the Order of Midnight and get the 2/2 flyer in addition to getting to play that other creature back to the battlefield. And so that's a lot of value all off of one card. That's like, it's like you cast the adventure and then you drew a copy of the 2/2 flyer that you could then cast at your convenience.
Oh, I do like it when I was able to get the Ravenous Chupacabra out of the graveyard.
Mm-hmm.
So I cast the sorcery and send the Order of Midnight on an adventure.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to pull the Ravenous Chupacabra out of my graveyard, cast the creature side of Order of Midnight, and then next turn, something of yours is going to die.
Yeah.
That feels pretty good. So I guess I can understand the way it would be a ceiling is...
It's maximum value. What does
Yeah.
a card look like best case scenario?
All right, well, that makes sense. Ceiling floor, are there any other ways you judge cards?
Yeah, we can get technical, and I'll give a shout out to the boys over at Limited Resources for teaching me about quadrant theory.
Quadrant theory.
Yeah, quadrant theory.
Is this a cube show or a math show?
Well, it's just imagining how a card plays at different quadrants of the game. There's no fancy equations or anything. So here's the way quadrant theory works. Quadrant theory takes into account where you are in the game and how the card performs at that moment. So there are basically 3 game states.
Oh, I know what you're talking about, I think. Like when we were playtesting the Regal Leosaur.
Yeah.
That Boros card
Yeah.
from this Ikoria set. And we kept talking about how it's no good on a turn 2. It's no good when you play it early.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah, so like the floor on him is super low when you play him as a 2-mana 2/2, right?
Right.
So that's him when you're at parity or when you're ahead, right? Is when you're playing him as a 2/2 body, right? How does that feel when you're ahead?
And in that card, it felt absolutely horrible.
Yep. How does it feel when you cast him and you're behind?
Worse. Don't cast him. Don't play him.
Right. And if your board is empty and you can't mutate him, and so like you're behind and you have to play a 2/2 vanilla, that feels horrible.
Oh gosh, when you're discussing it like this, why are we still trying to playtest him?
Well, because I was excited by the ceiling. You know, like the when the aggro deck is doing what it's supposed to, when you're ahead, and this is why it's not a good card. When you're ahead, you mutate, right? And you destroy your opponent.
Right.
But the problem is he seems to be only good when you're ahead.
That's true. So I guess if the card doesn't have enough upside at the beginning of a game or when you're tied in a game or,
Yeah.
you know, if it doesn't have enough upside when you're not getting at its max value, maybe it's not the right card for your cube.
Yeah, and that's why the Leosaur doesn't cut the mustard.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's why I leave all this stuff to you. That's a lot of thinking.
Yeah, it is.
I just like the playing. I like to play.
Yeah. So
I
we
like
get
to play with you.
family podcast.
I didn't say
Family
anything bad. I
podcast.
didn't say anything
Oh,
bad.
my God.
I like to play with you. I like to play cards with you.
Oh my God. I mean, I like playing with you too. I do.
Okay, well, let's assume that your wife knows what you're talking about when actually I don't.
Okay.
And let's just assume that I want to play test. What
Okay.
do I do then? Because if I can't evaluate the cards on my own, what would you suggest?
Well, if you can't evaluate the cards on your own, I know a really sweet YouTube channel that you might could tune into. No, you don't have to worry about evaluating cards on your own. There are plenty of people to do that for you. I'd like to give a shout out to the boys over at Solely Singleton on their podcast. You can actually catch them on Apple as well, and you should. And a huge shout out to Usman, who writes over at Cool Stuff Inc. He's like the grandpa of Cube. He's fantastic. He releases a set review article every time a new set comes out. He playtests everything, and the write-ups are really excellent. So yeah, if you don't want to listen to me and you don't want to listen to the boys at Solely Singleton, listen to what Usman says. He writes the gospel according to Cube.
Oh, that sounds good to me because I like the playing. I don't like the thinking behind the cube tweaking. I leave that to you. You pamper me, and I get the cards out, and I just say, let's play. So you're getting your ideas from Usman and Solely Singleton. I think you've also gotten ideas from White Wolf 123.
Oh gosh, yeah. Oh my, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
don't let me leave him out. He's over at MTG Salvation. He writes in the forums over there, and his content is excellent as well.
Right. Well, we can't leave out the fact that Magic is a gathering. So talk to your friends, boys and girls, and figure out which cards they think you should be including.
Absolutely. Sometimes I'll even playtest a card I know is bad, just because you or Josh has expressed interest in, like, I want to play it. I'm like, all right, well, we'll plug it in for a few drafts and see how it goes.
Absolutely. And sometimes I will make you pick a card that's not very great.
That's all right. It's fine.
So you mentioned supporting a deck. Can you give me an example of what you mean by that? A card that would support a deck?
Yeah. Okay. So, Luris. We've added Luris with Ikoria, right?
Yeah. Is that the one that allows you to get cards out of the graveyard?
Yeah. So Luris is 1 hybrid Orzhov for a 3/2 lifelinker. He's got Companion. We're going to ignore that for now. And then his meaningful line of text is you can play permanents with a CMC of 2 or less from your graveyard. You can play 1 a turn.
And that seems pretty good.
That seems pretty good. So Luris has made it into our cube because we support a Orzhov Aristocrats deck.
Yes, we do.
So I put him in to make that deck a little bit stronger. He's hybrid mana. He's super easy to cast. So you're always going to be able to play him on curve if you're in the Orzhov deck. It doesn't matter if you've got plains or swamps or neither or one or each. It just doesn't matter. So you'll always play him on curve. And then he'll always let you get your Blood Artist or your Zulaport Cutthroat back out of your yard because they're 2 CMC or less. Right? So we include him as a playtest to help beef up that deck.
True. But I'm going to go backwards here for a second because I'm going to have applied knowledge.
Okay.
The floor for him would be that you get him in your hand early and you don't have anything in your graveyard to recur.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, the floor on Luris is, there's nothing in my graveyard. I played a 3/2 lifelinker for 3 mana.
But still lifelink, so that's okay.
Yeah. Like, the body on him is fine.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's easy to cast.
Yes, and the floor is also that you just play him and he gets killed because your opponent's scared of him.
Oh. Loris gets killed?
Yeah, well, there is an option is that you wait and play him on turn 4. So you play him, he hits the board, you hold priority, and then you use him, and then they kill him. But if you tap out on turn 3 and play him, then yes, the floor could be Swords to Plowshares, deuces.
Well, isn't that always the way when you're playing against someone who has Swords to Plowshares?
That frequently is the way, yes. But that you have to just be okay with that being the floor. Are you okay with your 3-drop getting popped immediately?
Personally, no, I'm not okay when you kill my creatures. I want my creatures. I need my men.
But you and your Game of Thrones references. Okay, yeah, but at 3 mana you can stand to lose your creature. At 6 mana, when you're it hurts. It feels so bad.
No.
So your 6 mana threats have to be more resilient.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. When you decide that you're going to playtest these cards, especially for a new set, how do you pick what you're going to take out? Why can't you just pick these 5 or 10 cards you want to playtest and add them to the cube?
So You can. I just want to say you can. You can take the 5 or 6 cards you want to play test, and you can just dump them into your cube.
But I can see your face. Listeners, he is making this ridiculous face over here like that is the worst possible thing you should do. So why don't you explain to us why that is
Why you got to call me out like that? This is radio. They didn't know.
I know. I'm sitting right beside you. So tell me, why shouldn't I just dump my cards in my cube and play test them that way?
So I want to reemphasize, you can if you want to. I'm having anxiety just thinking about it. There are some really good things that come out of removing cards from your cube in order to play test. And for me, I think the big one is it forces you to consider who's the low man on the totem pole, right? Like which card isn't pulling its weight. And sometimes it'll force you to make some hard cuts. Like, are you leaving that card in the cube because you love it and it's your baby? Or are you leaving it in the cube because it does its job?
Well, to be fair, that was something I really struggled with when we first started Cube. There were cards that I saw and I was like, oh, I love this card. And it turns out that it really wasn't pulling its weight. So although I might be a favorite or a fan of certain things, you got to put in cards that complete the cycle and complete your cube in a good way. So, for example, when we were playtesting this new Ikoria card, Kogla, I think it was the Titan 8.
Titan 8, Kogla.
So it's a 6 CMC beater, and I think you pulled out the Honored Hydra for it. Yeah. How did you make that distinction?
Okay, so there are 2 choices that you can do when you playtest, or at least I should say there are 2 choices that I use when I playtest. And one is I pull a card that fulfills a similar role to see if the new card fills that role and how well it does that. Or I leave the comparison card in and see how drafters feel about the 2 together, or to compare it against other cards in that spot. So in this case, Honored Hydra is the cut. Right. An Honored Hydra, for those of you who don't know, is a 5 and a green for a 6/6 trampler that has embalm for 3 and a white, which means you get to embalm it out of your graveyard after it dies.
Which is a gross ability.
It's really strong. It's like drawing you another copy of
Absolutely.
itself. In this case, I cut Honored Hydra out. And when I say I cut it out, I don't actually mean that I like got rid of the card. I have a cube on deck binder. And so anything that gets cut out of the cube goes into the binder. That way maybe I can bring it back later. But anyway, so I cut Honored Hydra because I wanted to see if Kogla could fill the role of the 6/6 beater and how good his upside was, or bad it was, compared to the Honored Hydra's embalm.
Right.
Now, the Hydra has trample, but the Kogla fights when he comes in, right? So he's a 6 mana 6/6 that fights another creature, which means he kills whatever he fights. He's a 6/6.
Absolutely.
So I was curious if the fight ability was better than the trample ability, so I switched them. There was no need to leave them both in to compare.
No, and you're not going to be needing that many beaters in the end of your curve anyway.
Yeah, I'm not trying to mess up the curve of the cube right there that way. So yeah, we were just comparing the trample versus the trample and the embalm versus the fight effect. And I think so far we both know how that experiment has turned out.
Yeah, if you didn't hear our last podcast, we definitely preferred the Honored Hydra to the Kogla Titan Ape. But I do remember playtesting, and it was really nice to be able to have Kogla in my hand and know exactly what the other card would have been.
Yeah.
So I could think to myself, I would rather have the Hydra because I could play it on the right curve. I didn't have to have 3 green lands to be able to produce that mana. Or I knew that once Kogla went to the graveyard, that if that had been a Hydra, I could have gotten it back with the embalm. So it was nice to have that actual knowledge between the two cards as I was playtesting. I could give you better feedback for it.
It really just lets us see how much the decks that played Honored Hydra want Kogla. And it turns out it's not that they don't want the fight effect. They do want the trample.
Oh, yeah, trample's good. Trample's good.
Trample seems to be better than fight at that CMC in that body.
But I've also seen times when you have placed a card in the cube and you didn't take out the other one that you were placing it with.
Yeah.
Like the Eidolon of Obstruction. You left in that and the other card to see which one was better, which one you...
Yeah, okay. So for those of you who don't know, Eidolon of Obstruction is 1 and a white for a 2/1 first striker. And his abilities is... loyalty abilities of planeswalkers your opponents control cost 1 more to activate. And so, yes, I could have cut another 2-drop white creature for him, but I really just wanted to see how he played in relation to that entire suite of creatures. So instead, I think I actually cut like a 4-drop white creature and just added him to those other 2-mana beaters for the white aggro deck.
Right.
I just wanted to compare him. How good is taxing the planeswalkers compared to the rest of the suite of 2-drops?
Absolutely.
And, most of the white aggro decks, when they play White Weenie, you play 3 or 4 2-drops in addition, to like your 7 1-drops or whatever.
Yeah, it's good to have at least 2 creatures at the same CMC in your hand at the same time, so you could even say, golly, I can only play one of these at this time. This is the one I would rather have.
Yeah.
So that is another good way of playtesting, to be able to compare 2 cards.
You get a good sense of how relevant the ability is.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But as you're playtesting, do you always think of replacing cards that have the same CMC?
No. It's very much just like Eidolon, when I was just talking about, like I cut a 4-drop to play Eidolon. You do not have to cut creatures who are the same CMC. You don't have to cut creatures for creatures. Sometimes I have planeswalkers I want to test. I'll cut creatures for them rather than cut other planeswalkers. It's not necessarily about the creature or the CMC. It's more about what decks want this card. Let me remove a piece from them and add this card, or let me remove something else and make that deck a little better with this card.
Tell us, when we were playtesting Luris of the Dream Den, what did you actually take out to playtest him?
We run an Orzhov enchantment called Hidden Stockpile.
Oh, I know Hidden Stockpile. That's the 1 white, 1 black enchantment with Revolt.
Yeah.
So at the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, you can create the 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. And then you can pay 1 sacrifice creature to scry.
Yeah.
Are
Yes.
you impressed?
Yeah, I'm impressed. It didn't sound like you were reading that off the screen at all.
Hey, that's a secret. Don't tell them.
Yeah, so we cut Hidden Stockpile. Hidden Stockpile was a sack outlet for the Orzhov Aristocrats deck.
Yes.
So I had 2 options. And option 1 is I cut a gold card from another guild and play Luris to make the Orzhov deck show up more. to make that aristocrat deck show up more. You don't have to
You can
make
do that? You can cut something from, I don't know, Rakdos or is it to play an extra card in Orzhov?
Yeah, absolutely. There are no rules.
I don't like this world you live in. I like rules.
So I will admit, most of the time I try and target my weakest guild card in that guild and remove it. And that is what I did here. But if you're really trying to force a deck or force an archetype, I like to over-support it if I'm playtesting it. So like when you wanted to add the artifact deck, right? I cut a ton of stuff and plugged in a whole bunch of different artifact deck synergies all over the cube.
Right.
And then we trimmed the bad ones out
Right.
the more we playtested the deck.
That is true. I do remember us doing that.
Yeah, so I over-supported. And I lopsided our cube. We were playing more blue cards. The colorless section went up. I trimmed several bad guild cards. I eliminated the wildfire deck initially. You didn't even notice, obviously.
Because I never play Wildfire.
No, absolutely not.
I probably need to watch one of your videos to understand what in the world it does.
But we've put it back since then. but yeah, so no, there are no rules. And if I'm really trying to playtest a single deck, then I will try and increase the density to make sure the deck happens more often. I think my favorite group of cuts were the Eldraine adventure cards. You know, where they're modal, and so like you could cut an instant and play Murderous Rider.
Those were some good cards.
Or you could cut a 3-drop, creature and play Murderous Rider. Like you really could just cut anywhere you wanted to. It felt really liberating to just cut whatever.
It's so funny that you mentioned that. If we look back over the way our cube has evolved over time, I mean, most recently it has been the Eldraine stuff where we have these mutating creatures just slamming the board and all
You mean
these
the Ikoria stuff?
Is it Ikoria?
Ikoria.
Okay, so we have the Ikoria. We've got Ikoria creatures coming in, slamming the board with mutates and cycles, and it has its own feel to the cube.
Yeah.
But if we go back to Eldraine, it was very mythical. It was very fairy tale.
Yeah.
And you had these adventure cards and all of these fairy tale creatures that would show up in the cube. And I actually like the way the cube evolves over time. It creates these strong memories and plays that we have.
Well, because when we playtest, we seldom playtest, 4 cards. We'll playtest like 20. So it really does feel like the set has invaded the cube.
Yes.
And we're seeing tons of new cards every draft.
Yes.
So the cube really does have a different feel for a little while every time a new set comes out. And then, then we pare down, we put back in the stuff that was good, we take out the stuff that was bad.
Yes. And to be fair, we probably draft our cube a couple times a week.
Yeah. Yeah, we draft a lot.
We really do, though. Well, if you are playtesting these extra things and you've got your guilds going wonky with not being balanced, how do you decide what you leave in and what you take back out?
Player feedback.
Player feedback.
Yeah, you can listen to them whine about their cards, and then you can make some intelligent cuts.
Knowing that I'm the one person you play with most often, and you say listen to them whine about their cards, I'm a little affronted by that. A little offended, I should say. But no, I mean, it's true. It's true. I'll tell you what I feel about the cards and how I feel about the play.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you listen to your players, and they'll tell you like this card didn't do enough, or I was never happy to see this, or this looks like a 2-drop, but it's really a 5-drop, and it plays that way, and at 5 it's too much mana, or I have to hold it too long. You remember complaining about Eternal Witness?
I remember that we took it out.
So Eternal Witness lets you return a card from your graveyard to your hand, right? It's a 3-mana creature, and you cast it, and you get a card out of your yard and put it to your hand.
Right, and I remember telling you that we needed more help getting creatures into the graveyard and then back onto the battlefield, that I don't want creatures going back to my hand just to have to cast them again. Is this what you meant? Yeah, so you didn't like that it didn't get your creatures onto the battlefield because you wanted to help the Reanimator deck, which is fine. Not the play it again and cast it again deck. No, I don't want to do that.
What we found more often than not is that there wasn't something in your graveyard you wanted because players were trying to play Eternal Witness as a 3-drop. Eternal Witness is not really a 3-drop. Landwar Elf on turn 1 into Eternal Witness on turn 2 is crap. There's nothing to get.
Low floor.
Right? So you paid 3 mana for a 2/1. Like, congratulations.
I don't want that.
Yeah, so we... And I cut it for different reasons to help the green mid-range deck because it just wasn't doing anything for them. In powered cubes in different environments, Eternal Witness is stronger, but it's also about realizing what CMC a card really has. And so if you're only playing a few 3-drops and Eternal Witness is one of them, then you have fewer 3-drops than you thought you had.
I don't think I understand. When you say the CMC of something, how can it not just be exactly what's on the card? If I'm looking at a one black, one other creature or spell, how is it not a 2 CMC thing?
Because you might not want to play it on turn 2. So, for example, we're just talking about Eternal Witness, right? Mm-hmm. So you don't want to play Eternal Witness on turn 3. If you're curving out, you don't want to play Eternal Witness on turn 3. There's nothing in your yard. So instead, what you wind up doing is holding Eternal Witness in your hand, waiting for there to be something in your yard so that then you don't feel horrible when you play Eternal Witness. So Eternal Witness is really a 4 or 5 drop at the earliest to help you bring back whatever got nuked at the beginning of the game. Mm-hmm. Well, it's also really good in like Simic decks where, like you cast the Ponder and then you play the Eternal Witness and you get the Ponder back, or Time Walk, if you want to do really busted stuff.
Okay.
So yeah, cards don't really necessarily have the CMC on them that they have. There's an opportunity cost that you're paying.
Opportunity cost?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like it's the opportune time to play it?
So we're getting a little bit in the weeds here, but I'll shout out Patrick Chapin for teaching me about cards and having hidden mana costs on them. My favorite example are tap lands. The hidden cost on tap lands.
Yes, I think you explained this to me once. So when you play a tap land on turn 1, and it feels bad because you don't actually have any mana.
I didn't have a 1-drop.
I didn't have a 1-drop. I couldn't use my 1-drop. But actually having the tap land was your 1-drop.
The tap land is your 1-drop.
Fixing your mana on turn 1 was the cost of being able to play it.
Yeah, it's the opportunity cost, right? Aha. So sometimes when I look at decks, especially in like retail draft, and I'm like, oh, I've only got 3 1-drops, but I drafted 4 tap lands, I've really got 7 1-drops. Fun facts, boys and girls. No charge for that. All of that's free.
Nice. Nice. You should read more often. So there's one more thing I wanted to mention. How do you keep up with all these different cards you're pulling out and pulling in? Do you keep a notebook somewhere? How are you keeping up with all of it? It's a lot.
No, you don't keep a notebook. You use a website. The one that I'm using currently is Tcgplayer. Shout out to Gwen and Ryan Sachs and all the guys who work on that website. Bless all of you. You need a website. Tcgplayer is fantastic. If you don't want to use that one though, you can use Cube Tutor. Ben, I think, is still running Cube Tutor. And, you can store your cube on there, but it's just so easy to sort your cube by CMC, or to put your colors out in curve view so you can see exactly how many white 1-drops you've got. It's by far, use a website. If something happened to those guys, I don't even want to think about that. That would be a miserable experience. Support their Patreons, guys. Just saying, support their Patreons.
Yes, there's a need for cube content, but there's also a need for ways to sort their cubes.
Yeah, the platform is really, really instrumental.
Absolutely. Obviously, our viewers know that I'm not the one that's designing our cube.
No.
That's not my role. My role is to enjoy it and sit back. I'm not the curator. I'm a connoisseur.
You don't make the wine, you show up and drink it.
That's exactly right. So I get to sit back and play all these cool cards, and then I have this feedback for you. I'm able to say, hey, I don't like this card, or that was busted. I want more of it. So what do you do with all my feedback? Oh, that face.
So, years ago, Mark Rosewater was at a game developers conference, and he gives this fantastic speech. And in that speech, one of the things he says he has learned about Magic is that players are fantastic at pointing out what's wrong or what they don't like about something, but they're horrible with solutions. So that you should take their feedback, but take it with a grain of salt and apply your own solutions. And
so you're telling me that just like in our marriage, you hear me, but you're not listening to me? Is that what you're trying to say?
Man, that couch is going to be so comfortable tonight. To an extent, I definitely am listening when you tell me that something played well or that something didn't. But sometimes you or another drafter will tell me like, oh, this card stunk. And I'm like, I look at the card, maybe you're playing Tectonic Giant or something. What's a good example of Skargan Hellkite? You're playing Skargan Hellkite, right? Like it's the 5-mana big fat Hellkite, and like, well, oh, cool. It was horrible. You're like, yeah, it was horrible. Well, what deck were you playing it in? I was playing it in Boros Aggro. And it makes me want to cry a little bit. Like I guess you could play it in Boros Aggro, But our cube's way too fast for our aggro decks to be playing that kind of 5-drop, so of course it didn't play very well for me.
Right. I mean, obviously, if you are the designer of a cube and you know that cube experience and how you've built your decks, obviously, certain cards work better and function better in different decks and archetypes within your cube. So listen to your drafters, because what they have to say matters. But to be fair, you're going to hear, feedback that they like and then feedback that you just kind of need to throw away because they don't know how you designed your cube.
Yeah, well, and to be fair, it's also your responsibility as the curator to design it in a way where the format feels intuitive so that they can draft your cards and figure out, like what decks are available inside the cube. So yes, like sometimes, especially new drafters, young drafters, some of the more inexperienced people who draft our cube occasionally, I definitely see misplays in their card pool. But other times you'll hear drafters whine about something in your cube that you're happy with. The red aggro deck, I got murdered tonight. Well, you're playing a dirtily deck. Get good, as they say.
Right. So if a player comes in and is trying to play control in Selesnya, you don't have any sympathy for them. Yeah,
the Selesnya control deck isn't functioning right. Really? Sorry. Tell me more. Tell me more. Wrath of God didn't feel good after your 4 drops.
Well, that's one of the reasons why the guidepost cards, those guild cards, are so important because they really do help your drafters kind of see what this guild is trying to do.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, guidepost cards, Wizards does this in their draft set. If you look at the uncommons when you're drafting retail draft, the uncommons will signal to you what decks are available inside the draft, and the gold cards at uncommons specifically are strong signals at what the archetypes are. And so in our cube, for the most part, our gold cards are meant to help drafters figure out what that color pair wants to be doing. And so, yes, sometimes new drafters don't catch on to that and they train wreck and they end up in like a big mid-range pile and they get hammered. But for the most part, I think that we're pretty good at trying to help guide them before the draft begins. But all that's a whole nother issue.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of other issues, I believe our next podcast is going to contain one of my favorite specialty cubes.
Oh, yeah. No doubt. We've been drafting it hardcore in preparation for it. Next week, we're going to talk about...
cubing after dark.
After dark cube.
Uncube.
Ooh-ah. You can't draft that while the kids are awake.
Actually, no. We do not typically play that cube or draft it when the children are up.
No, much to our son's chagrin.
Yeah, our little son, he wants to play the uncube so badly, but some of those cards are just not appropriate for his age level.
No, because we should specify our uncube plays uncards from all 3 unsets, and some of the older stuff is not for children.
Yeah, absolutely. Although that's not going to change the podcast. If you guys want to listen in and hear about the uncube,
if your kids are in the back seat, you'll be okay.
Yeah, it'll still be family appropriate.
Yeah.
So that's going to do it for today, Cubers. If you want to playtest cards in your cube, you can either listen to some of this advice or let someone do it for you.
I see you've chosen the latter option.
Absolutely. That's the one that fits me most likely.
If you guys have questions for us, please feel free to reach out. We're at cubefor2@gmail.com. You can catch us on Twitter at cubefor2. And don't forget, if you want to actively support our channel, feel free to use that Tcgplayer affiliate link in the show notes below. We'll see you next week. And as always, and until next time,
shuffle up and keep cubing, our friends.